So our topic is comparing the gay population to a country's personal sub-freedom index. Our topic is the amount of open LGBT people by their country and then that country's freedom sub-index. So the freedom sub-index is a score that each country receives that basically tells you how free the population is and like what their rights are and basically how happy they are and things like that. This takes into account several rights as well as personal and civic and political rights. So countries such as North Korea would score very low, where countries such as Canada would score very high. We made our independent variable the percentage of the LGBT population because it's not really a choice, it's just something you're born as. So it's not very easily influenced by an outside factor, it is therefore the independent variable. The dependent variable would be our subindex because the subindex can be easily influenced by different things a country does, different things a country acts. The subindex can easily change over time by an influence of many things. So we think these two variables have a relationship because our data is based on the relationship of people who are openly gay. So our original hypothesis was that the higher population you have of gay people or LGBT people, the higher your score would be. We find out more about that later. But we thought they would have a relationship because the LGBT people of that country would affect, when you have a higher margin of your population, you obviously want to cater to as most of your population as much as you can. So we figured that would have a difference in their score. So as far as who would care about this, society in general will obviously care. It is a very social issue right now, which politicians, which would also be another career that would care, politicians will care. Politicians are getting involved to show they have a stance in this, and they also use it to increase the voting sway, and hopefully in the future will realize that it is a demographic that they should and need to reach out to. LGBT rights activists will care because seeing the number adds more facts to a socially and typically emotional debate. It's often debated between morality and it's a very touchy subject in most cultures as well. And seeing the numbers add more facts when you actually look at how much of a population is being affected by certain things. And of course, everybody is affected by the personal sub-index. It just tends to be that LGBT people are affected a little more. Looking at the data might also give countries with a lower score a chance to improve, to realize how much of their population they could potentially be affecting, and hopefully change.
Our median fell very close together, and there was only really a 0.2 difference.
The overall average of the Sun index from the countries we did sample, as we only sampled 30, was 1.9. This is actually very high. It would be better to use the mean as it goes further in depth. As you can see, it has a lot more decimals. It's a more average of what you would see from the numbers.
After placing our data in a histograph, we discovered that it was very left skewed, meaning that our countries had a higher average. We did only sample 30, but the 30 we did were very high.
This is likely due to the result of easier gathering of information, because if you tend to have a very low score, then you, again, would probably censor more information and things like that, making it harder for us to gather both accurate and easy to obtain information with our resources.
Afterwards, we did a box and whisker plot and showed that there was no signs of outliers because most of our sub-index data was relatively close together. Most of the decimals were under 4. We did not really expect there to be many outliers, and we also did adjust the settings on our graph to make sure that it did show if there was any outliers involved.
So our standard deviation was 1.58635,274. The standard deviation shows how far the variables are apart from the average number. The lower the number, the standard deviation, the closer the variables are to the average, which we all learned. So our standard deviation is what we expected because when you're going with a score, very few countries is going to have the same score. As well as you have to look at the differences between all the countries, which would influence their score as well. With the small scale the score is on, it is a little high, but that's because we tried to get as wide of a range as possible to get a clearer graph. So the correlation of our scatter plot shows that contrary to our original hypothesis, which would be the higher your population, the higher your score, the downward negative correlation actually shows that the lower your population, the higher your score. As you can see over here, with the highest being, I think that was around a 7, with the negatives going all the way up to where Canada's more located up here, but we only have like a 3% population. Obviously, there's a small outlier up there, and it is a weak correlation, but it is definitely there as seen. And the dots are spread pretty evenly and far from the line. Not relatively far, but pretty evenly enough to get a solid correlation.
Looking through our data, we found that the information is important because it's valuable to know how much diversity we have throughout the world and in between different countries. But we did find that the data was very biased because
it's harder to come out, especially in countries where such a thing, especially with the lower scores, it's so frowned upon and so hard to be an LGBT member.
We didn't have all the data from every single country because this topic was very difficult to research and the data wasn't foolproof just because we couldn't collect all the data from people who are not openly gay.
And it was also, for some of the bigger countries are in there because it is a little easier to find the data for Canada, which is very open, and Russia, again, which is like a very huge country, rather than the small countries, definitely harder to find information on.
Overall, our data was very difficult to find, and most of our results were very biased and tainted, but from the information we did find, it was very valuable to society in general, as it is important to know the level of diversity we have throughout our countries throughout the world.